So next up is Eric Hodnett, who's going to introduce our program speaker today.
So back in 2007, there was, and on the slide, one of the slides, there was a youth exchange student inbound, Leonard Jorens from Germany. And the Hagemans, they were hosting him for the fall, and we were hosting him for the winter. And it was through that youth exchange thing that we met as families. And so that's when I met Matthew. What is that, 18 years ago? So he was a little guy then. And so over the years, we did a lot of things together, including every Christmas, we'd go out to the woods and cut Christmas trees. And we'd usually do some kind of a Christmas Eve celebration. There was boating and fishing going on. One time, Matthew was with us fishing with Ted and I, and he had a fish on. And I just happened to notice this shadow thing. And there was an osprey that thought that fish should be his. And so I said to Matthew, I said, let me have the rod for a minute. And the osprey comes down, and just before it hits the water, I pull on the line, right? We have a frustrated osprey, but then Matthew got to get his fish, which he brought home proudly to give to his grandmother. I remember that. I assume you do too. And like I said, we did some boating outings and so forth. One of the funny little anomalies was Matthew went to Oregon State, and so did my wife. And he was telling us about an apartment that he had rented. And so we said, "Oh yeah, where's that at?" "Well, it's here." "Oh really? What's the name of that apartment?" "Oh, so it's the same apartment complex that my wife lived in." "Well, what unit are you in?" "The same exact unit." 50 years later, he's living in the same unit that my wife lived in. So Matthew had gone to North High School, then he went on to Oregon State, and he'll tell you all about his adventure with nuclear engineering. So please help me welcome Matthew Hageman.
Yeah, clicker around here somewhere. All right. Thank you, Mr. Hodnett, for the introduction, and thank you all for your time and attention. Rotary has obviously been a very big part of my life growing up over the years, and so happy to share with you guys a little bit in the what I've done in the time since then. So, also like to start by saying these are my personal views. They don't reflect anything of my company or the organizations I'm affiliated with. I'll try not to speak about them too poorly. My story starts about 8 years ago in 2017. One of my friends invited me to go on a trip up to Oregon State to tour a nuclear reactor. And I had no idea what that was. So once we, drove the 3.5 hours up to Corvallis and walked down a couple of winding roads, or down through a couple of windy hallways and through a locked door that you had to buzz intercoms to get through, and then up some metal stairs, I was a little bit disappointed. Um, there's just this big blue thing of concrete, which is kind of like our pool at home. And this also is just a big pool of water with some metal and dirt at the bottom. And I was like, wow, that's kind of lame. Um, but the guy who's in the middle there of the reactor was actually my tour guide. And as he started talking about it, I became very interested with what this pool of water could do. So to describe exactly what this picture is, this is the reactor. It's just a pool of water. It's about the size of a trash can, just at the bottom of some metal rods. And that image is taken from this steel grate looking down. But some of the things they've done at the Oregon State Trigger Reactor, they age dated the moon rocks when they brought them back using neutron activation analysis. And they were also able to solve a murder. So there were bullet fragments from a crime scene, and there were bullets from a suspect's house. And they were able, by lowering down the bullet fragments into the reactor and then pulling them out after they absorbed some neutrons, they were able to measure exactly the material composition of those fragments and the bullets and be able to match them up to say that they were made from the same batch. And that was enough evidence to convict the murderer. They also kept cracking a lot of jokes. You can see there that they have a fishing rod they're using to lower the samples into the reactor, which they can then pull them out with. And they called it the fission pole. So lots of punny people. I felt right at home. After that trip, I was inspired to learn a bit more about nuclear power. And this is sort of a diagram of how nuclear power works. You start with nuclear heat from a fission reaction in the reactor vessel over here. And then you use that heat to boil water, which the pressure from the steam spins a turbine, which generates electricity. And if you don't know, this is how all electricity is generated in one way or another. If it's a fossil fuel plant, you just burn the fuel and then you use that to boil the water. If it's a wind turbine, you just spin the turbine. And for hydroelectric, also similar, you just let the water down through the turbine. So when I returned to high school, my senior year, I decided to do my senior paper on sort of alternative energy sources. Nuclear was new to me. I'd been interested in wind and solar and stuff growing up. And so I wrote my senior paper on sort of the different benefits there and the trade-offs between the different types of electricity. And so this is sort of a summary of what I learned. The first thing that's worth knowing in order to understand this is that the power grid is inflexible. You can't store energy very well. So you have to produce the power at the exact same moment that it's used. And we call that load following. And hydroelectric is the best at this. You can just let more or less water through very easily whenever you want. And the conversion efficiency is fantastic. But we've built most of the dams in all the best places, so this isn't really going to work for more power in the future. We need other sources. So there's an opportunity to have hydroelectric power. It's definitely the best. Renewables are pretty cheap now. They haven't always been that way, but they are not reliable. They produce power whenever they want and not necessarily when we need it. They also actually end up having a pretty large environmental impact because they have to take up so much space and they are very resource intensive. Lots of metal and glass and concrete that you need over a large area to put in renewable power. Fossil fuels stand a little bit in contrast to that. They don't take up as much space, but they pollute quite a bit. They're also low cost, but they have the benefit of being reliable because you choose when you generate the power. Nuclear fits in there by also being similar to fossil fuels. You choose when you generate the power, but it has a much lower environmental impact. The energy density of nuclear power is ridiculous. And so it takes up a very, very small environmental footprint, but it's very high cost. And then one aside here at the end, batteries, if you want to choose to store energy or drive electric cars or something, batteries are about the worst thing you could do to the environment. They are incredibly resource intensive. They're not very good at storing energy and they're very expensive. So if you're looking at like buying electric cars or something, electric cars are actually worse for the environment than gasoline cars. If you want to do the environmentally conscious thing, buy a hybrid. This led to my next interesting thing I found out about nuclear, which is that is just steam coming out of that cooling tower. And the other thing that's good to know is this is not actually the nuclear reactor. That's just what you use to remove the heat. This small building over here is the nuclear reactor. And part of the reason that nuclear power is so expensive is because all of the waste is managed. The only waste that nuclear leaves to the environment is that steam, unless, of course, there's an accident. So all of the waste is managed, which makes it quite expensive, but it makes it the safest of all sources of power. From there, I decided to go to college about it. Um, I was interested from the nuclear reactor tour and decided to sort of apply to Oregon State and picked the nuclear engineering program kind of on a whim. I was a really big chemistry nerd in high school. I even took some classes at SOU my senior year. So my freshman year of college, I had a huge dilemma of deciding whether or not I wanted to do chemical or nuclear engineering. And I ended up picking nuclear not because it was the most interesting to me at the time, it was because I didn't have many chemistry classes left to take. So I had a lot more to learn about nuclear, and so I decided to stick it out with that. And I ended up having a really good opportunity from my chemistry experience to work in the radiochemistry lab at the radiation center. So that's doing chemistry with radioactive elements, which is the same as doing chemistry, but then the radiation messes up all your processes. Um, a couple of years later, I ended up getting an internship at NewScale. But quick fun facts that I learned in my first couple of years there, antimatter is real. This was something that was really surprising to me. I thought this was just something in science fiction, but no, this is something we use every day in medical scans. So positrons or antimatter electrons are a type of radiation that's emitted from certain nuclides. And when the positron interacts with an electron, there's an annihilation reaction that sends gamma rays in two exactly opposite directions. And so if you've ever heard or had a PET scan, that is positron emission tomography, and you attach a positron emitting nuclide to a chemical that then concentrates in certain parts of the body. So you can use this to like find cancer cells because you can measure the time difference between the gamma rays leaving the body and back calculate exactly where it came from. So by taking that radionuclide and concentrating it on certain areas of the body, you can find out exactly where cancer cells have traveled to. So while I was learning about that and working in the radiochemistry lab, I was also applying to internships at NewScale, which is a small modular reactor company that was born out of Oregon State and is based in Corvallis. And they were sort of the leader at the time in small modular reactor technology. And I was super happy to be there right as COVID started happening and the radiochemistry lab was closed down for COVID. I got an internship. And so I was able to start remotely working for NewScale, but I had no idea what I was doing. I was still in my first couple of years of school. I hadn't taken any nuclear engineering classes yet, only the lower division classes, and I had no coding experience whatsoever. And for context, about 50% of my job now has to do with coding in one way or another. So NewScale invested a lot in me and allowing me to learn those things on the job. But even though I knew nothing, I was very, very excited about everything that was happening there. The NewScale reactor is really the answer to what happened at Fukushima. It's incredibly safe. It runs on natural circulation and is in a big pool of water. So basically, this allows the reactor to be what we call walk away safe. So any accident could happen to this, and without any human or computer actions, it can cool itself indefinitely so that you don't have a meltdown. So what happened at Fukushima could never happen with a NewScale reactor. So it was very cool to watch that design be approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And then I also got to witness some of the conversations about the power up rate that was just announced. So running a reactor in natural circulation is difficult. It's very, very safe, but it makes the economics difficult. So I got to hear a little bit about the conversations and how you increase that power so you can make it cheaper. I also got to learn a little bit about reactor methods and machine learning there, which ended up being the inspiration for my master's thesis a couple of years later. So in 2022, I decided to go to grad school, but I knew I needed a break. So I quit my internship at NewScale and I went to Washington, D.C. to learn about nuclear policy. I still wanted to work on advanced nuclear reactors, and try to bring those in, but instead I took a different angle with it and looked at nuclear waste policy. What I learned there was that geologic repositories are really the only option. There was a Superman movie at some point about launching nuclear waste into space, and that is a terrible idea unless you're Superman. But to do a geologic repository, you have to store the waste for about 1 million years for it to become safe again. And for context, human history is about 10,000 years. So that's a very, very difficult technical challenge, but it's still not as big as the political challenge. We've mostly figured out that technical piece. There's been some success on the politics in Finland, and also the waste isolation pilot plant in Carlsbad, New Mexico is actively disposing of nuclear waste. But these only require two parties. Only the federal government and local communities are involved in agreeing to this facility. When you add in that third party of the state government, it becomes much, much more difficult. Even at Yucca Mountain, both the local community and the federal government were in favor of the site, but the Nevada state government remains strongly opposed. One of the things that I learned there was that perceived risk is not the same as actual risk. So there are a few examples up here. Airplane crashes are, I think, a pretty good one for the actual risk being much, much smaller than the perceived risk. And this is also true for conversations about radiation. So my policy recommendation at the end of the internship was to address this gap first. You address this with education. You inform people about the actual risk so that they can align their perceptions with reality. And my recommendation was to educate people about radiation so that when you go to have conversations about siting a nuclear waste disposal facility, you can do it from a common ground where everyone knows what they're talking about. That was my aside for the summer. I then returned to school in the fall to start work on my master's, and that's the wrong one. This is where the apartment was that Eric mentioned in relation to campus. This is the radiation center where I was going to work in the radiochemistry lab, and this was my office for grad school. So I appreciated the 5-minute walking commute. But yeah, I started off with modeling a research reactor, and I took way more advanced math classes than I ever wanted to. And I also didn't have a very good relationship with my advisor. So for the first time in sort of my nuclear engineering journey, I was pretty unmotivated. I wasn't really interested in what I was doing. And although I was still getting all of my work done, it was a slog. So when it came time to apply for internships, I was late in the process and I only had one offer, and I accepted that offer without asking my advisor's permission, and that ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back. He chose to end our relationship, and so in March, I decided to take the rest of the year off of school and start my internship at Kairos Power a little bit early. So 2023, in the summer, I moved down to the Bay Area and I was to work at Kairos Power, and I was a little bit skeptical, both about myself and the company. I had never worked full-time in person before because I had been remote at NewScale or not had a full-time job. And I was also pretty skeptical about Kairos. Their goal is to build a first-of-a-kind reactor design by 2030, and the company was started in 2016. And for context, just the construction of nuclear reactors tends to take at least 10 years. So I was very skeptical about what Kairos was going to be able to do. But as the summer went on and I learned more about it and got to meet the people there, I loved it. And to describe a little bit about how Kairos's process worked, they start by building non-nuclear test units. So they've already built and taken down one engineering test unit that is a high temperature molten salt facility, and then the next step is to then build a small nuclear test unit and eventually scale up to a commercial power plant. So no other nuclear company is trying to do this. They all design reactors on paper and then just go and try to build them. Kairos is vertically integrating the manufacturing process, and they're actually going and learning as much as they can about the construction before they try to include radiation in the equation. And the ultimate goal here is Kairos is trying to beat the cost of natural gas. Natural gas is very, very cheap. No other nuclear company would even try to do this because it's so crazy. So at the end of the summer, I left pretty motivated. I had found a new master's thesis advisor, and Kairos sponsored a thesis for me with the requirement that I work 20 hours a week for them while I was doing it. So the following year was incredibly difficult. I was working part-time for Kairos and taking the rest of my classes and also trying to do a master's thesis, but I didn't have the problem that I had had the year before. Kairos's mission is to enable the world's transition to clean energy with the ultimate goal of dramatically improving people's quality of life while protecting the environment. And in order to achieve this mission, we must prioritize our efforts to focus on a clean energy technology that is affordable and safe. And this is why I didn't have trouble working 80 hours a week for a year to get everything done, is because I got to work on this. I wasn't doing this my first year of grad school, and finding this mission again was really important to me. It has allowed me to really thrive since then. A year ago, I started working at Kairos full-time and finished my master's degree, and it's been very, very cool. They have a co-located manufacturing and engineering workplace. So I look out the window that's right next to my desk into the other half of the building where they're actively building and testing engineering hardware. And sometimes there's flashes on the back wall from welding. It's very, very cool for someone who just works at a computer all day. And Kairos has, in the last couple of years, become the front runner in the advanced nuclear space. I was super excited about NuScale when I was there, but in early 2024, they laid off 30% of their workforce because although I think they still have the safest nuclear reactor design I've ever seen, no one's buying it because it's too expensive. In the meantime, Kairos has started pouring safety-related concrete for the test reactor in Tennessee. No other nuclear company can say that. And this is a picture of me at the Nevada National Security Site with some other Kairos people observing a critical experiment. So I've had a really great time, lots of opportunities, even just the last year as Kairos is growing rapidly and chasing these incredibly aggressive goals towards bringing new advanced nuclear to the US. Last summer, Kairos and Google signed an agreement to develop 500 megawatts of power by 2035. 1 megawatt is roughly 1,000 homes, so that'll be 500,000 homes of power in the next 10 years. And I have no idea if we'll be able to do this. This is an incredibly aggressive goal, but if we do, it'll be amazing. And regardless, the next 10 years are going to be very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. We have time for a couple quick questions before we move on. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, great talk. I really enjoyed it. So Kairos is building a plant. So I remember 20 years ago, they built a gas power plant in Klamath Falls, and coincidentally, it was 500 megawatts. So most of these larger nuclear plants around the country are considerably larger than that. Then you have firms like NuScale and another one, TerraPower, which Bill Gates is behind, and they're looking on these modular type plants. So I was in North Carolina about 2 years ago, July of 23, met one of their engineers for there. He had a doctorate in nuclear engineering. And so I asked him, when do you see these things becoming commercially viable? And he said, at least 10 or 12 years away. And so that to me was maybe 15 or even more years away. So Kairos seems to be a lot further along, as you've alluded to there. And they're not coming up with something as huge as, say, some of the other traditional nuclear plants, but they're coming up with something greater than a modular thing. So, and they're pouring concrete, as you said. So you believe that maybe 2030, 2032, this may become potentially viable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Kairos's goal, so the 2030 deadline is when a lot of coal plants start to be phased out. So there's a lot of demand around that time for new power, and nuclear is trying to find its way in there. Kairos is also doing small modular reactors. The 500 megawatts will be multiple sites, multiple reactors. The benefit of doing the small modular reactors is you can fabricate in a fabrication facility instead of having to build something on site. And so you can decrease cost a lot faster that way and avoid the cost and timeline overruns that happen there. The key to Kairos's strategy, oh, the slides are gone. The key to Kairos's strategy is that iterative development. They're trying to do the non-nuclear test units first so that they can figure out all of the issues that will come up so they have cost certainty in what happens. I would probably say 12 years away is reasonable. I think Kairos is insane, but that's what makes it so much fun to work there.
We have time for one more quick question. Perfect.
Thanks, Matthew. That was great. What about the fusion versus fission kind of a thing?
Good question. I don't know much about fusion other than it's been 20 years away for a very, very long time. And it is still 20 years away. Fission is something that you can do reasonably. There are natural fission reactors just in the environment. If you get enough uranium dirt close enough together, you'll have a fission reaction happen. But the only place you see fusion reactions happen naturally is at the center of the sun. So you're talking about trying to create the conditions of the center of the sun on Earth as opposed to just generating power with something that already occurs naturally.
Matthew, if we have any additional questions, are you willing to stay and to speak? Okay. If anybody has any additional questions, Matthew will hang and answer those for you. And Matthew, if we'll switch sides. Ready? There you go. Like we practiced it or something. All right. Matthew, as a thank you for being our speaker today, we have a children's book that we will donate to the Smart Reading Program. There we go. If you would, today's book is my very first space book. How's that for a nuclear engineer? If you would please sign the inside cover. Here we go, right there. And then we'll get it into the hands of a young reader. So thank you again. Let's give another round of applause for Matthew.